This video was delayed due to recent COVID-19 concerns. Please remember to wash your hands, practice social distancing, and wear a mask whenever possible. Stay safe and enjoy the video.
It's my favorite time of the year again. Happy Friday the 13th, everyone, and welcome back to my Friday the 13th comic books retrospective. This time we're talking the WildStorm era, kicked off in 2007 with a 6-issue miniseries simply called Friday the 13th by Justin Gray, Jimmy Palmiotti, Adam Archer, and Peter Guzman. The setup for this one is really familiar. A corporate type is looking to rehabilitate Camp Crystal Lake and turn it into some kind of attraction, using the legends and ghost stories of Jason Voorhees and his massacres as the selling point. He hires a group of teenagers to renovate the campsite. This is the exact same setup as Friday the 13th Bloodbath. Way to break the mold, guys. The group of teens are way less likable this time around. The ones from Bloodbath knew how to get along and have a good time for the most part. These guys are a bunch of hotheads and start bickering and pushing each other around from the first day in. This poor guy Brian gets the worst of it, taking a bunch of shit from everyone when it's totally uncalled for. They play with the idea of copycats taking the mantle of Jason Voorhees in later issues, and I was starting to think Brian was responsible for the killings. Cause shit, I don't blame this guy for snapping at a certain point. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. An interesting angle that this series takes is playing up the more supernatural elements of Camp Crystal Lake. Not that Friday the 13th is a stranger to the supernatural. I mean, Jason has been resurrected more than a handful of times. But in this comic book, there are more ghostly, inexplicable events that occur. Early on, this girl Sally goes for a swim in the lake and gets pulled down by what seems to be the ghosts of hundreds of children in the bottom of the lake. And later on, ghostly apparitions appear floating above the lake. They make for some pretty cool visuals and feel at place in the Friday the 13th universe in my opinion. At the end of the first night, we get our first kill with these two stoners hanging out by the lake. In the midst of these killings, we get a bit of a whodunit scenario. Since the idea of copycats is constantly brought up and characters having plausible motives, Brian, who's constantly being bullied and is shown creeping in Sally's cabin, this guy Mike is caught with a hockey mask identical to Jason's, but he insists it's a novelty item that's going to be sold in the camp's gift shop. And finally Sally, who is later revealed to have psychological problems. She actually ends up killing one of the other teenagers, poor Brian, as if he didn't have it bad enough already. But it was due to a hallucination that was caused by going a prolonged period of time without taking her meds. The comic periodically cuts to Sally laying in a hospital bed and being questioned by a police officer, taking place after the camp massacre. So we know she survives, leaning into the idea that Jason Voorhees might have not even been involved in the murders of these teens. At least this time. This idea has been done before in Friday the 13th Part 5, but I don't mind it being revisited in this comic. I like the idea that Jason's influence can surpass his own body and push other people over the edge and go on their own massacre. As long as we're not talking body possession, Jason goes to hell style. After Sally realizes that she killed Brian, she goes completely nuts, running around bare ass in the camp while the other teenagers are holed up in a cabin trying to survive the night. Sally runs into who appears to be the actual Jason Voorhees, but at this point I'm not really convinced if it's really him or another hallucination, because Jason does something completely uncharacteristic, and that's handing over his most prized possession, his trusty machete. Sally neglects it and takes a swing at Jason, which could be interpreted as her fighting the psychological turmoil going inside her, but who knows. In the final issue, we jump back centuries to when the grounds of Crystal Lake were inhabited by native tribes and invaded by white settlers. The shaman of one of these tribes was murdered by the lake for refusing to leave the land, his blood covering the surface of Crystal Lake. Since then, the lake and woods claimed countless lives in search for the right vessel to carry the hatred of the tribe. And that vessel was young Jason Voorhees when he drowned that day. For years, Jason has been cursed with this hatred, claiming over hundreds of lives in Crystal Lake. The explanation as to how Jason Voorhees is this unstoppable monster has always been up in the air. Is he just a zombie resurrected by a bolt of lightning? Is he a deadite? Did his mother practice some sort of witchcraft in the past? Or are there bigger, more hellish forces at play? Nevertheless, his supernatural origins haven't been solidified, and I think this is an interesting take on it. I like when the actual grounds of Crystal Lake play a part in his supernatural capabilities. And if you're not a fan of this, it's only a comic book and probably not meant to be taken as canonical. Back in present times, a couple of the last survivors, Alicia and Rico, are making a last-ditch effort out of Camp Crystal Lake, but Jason catches up and makes quick work of them. Like I said before, Sally manages to survive the massacre and is being questioned at a hospital as the prime suspect. But surprise, Jason gives her a warm visit and takes care of unfinished business. And before we close off, we get another instance of some rich smug buying Camp Crystal Lake for some project. God, don't they learn? But it looks like it won't make for another comic book, because Jason shuts that shit down immediately. This miniseries is just fine. It's another run-of-the-mill Friday the 13th story that doesn't do anything extraordinary. I would have been more interested if this story leaned more into going a more supernatural route, having more ghostly occurrences, and digging more into the spiritual background with the tribesmen being killed in the 1800s. That would have gone a long way in making this comic book unique and not blend with all the other similar stories that have been told. Up next is Pamelas Tale by Mark Andreyko and Sean Mull. This 2-issue story gives us a look at Pamela Voorhees' life before the birth of Jason. The comic book starts with a young lady asking for directions to Camp Crystal Lake. One of the locals offers to take her about halfway. After she's dropped off, she hitches another ride from a driver sporting a cozy-looking turtleneck and stylish haircut. The world's greatest mother, Pamela Voorhees. Along the way, the young teenager asks Pamela if she has any children, and Pamela recounts the days of her pregnancy with Jason. Pamela was a housewife, living with her abusive husband Elias. She expresses that she enjoyed her wifely duties of cooking, cleaning, and generally doing what would please Elias. As she tells the story, she paints a different picture from reality, describing Elias as a man interested in performing arts, when it really meant he would aggressively tell her to be quiet when he's listening to his radio. She describes when they make love as if a cyclone of passion went through their home. We can imagine how things really went. Pamela kept her pregnancy a secret from Elias due to the fear of how he would react. I like how Pamela would occasionally hear Jason's voice in her head influencing her, exactly how Jason would hear her voice in the future.
It's all done now, Jason. Your job is through. Return to Mommy.
One night after Elias roughed up Pamela, she decides she's had enough when she realizes that Jason's life could also be in danger from her abusive husband. She kills him in his sleep, blows up their home, and dumps his remains in a lake. Single, jobless, and with a baby on the way, Pamela finds herself in a small town where she rents a house that's rumored to be haunted. Jason loves it, and that's enough for Pamela to claim this as their new home. Pamela lands a job at a local diner. One day while she's working, she's hit with excruciating pain as she goes into labor. In the hospital, she gives birth to the cutest future maniacal killer to walk the earth. And look at this fucking doctor just smoking a cigarette in the hospital. Classy. Pamela gets a job offer at Camp Crystal Lake where she'll be cooking for the kids attending the summer camp. This is where we get the classic tale of Jason Voorhees drowning in the lake because some of the counselors were busy getting busy. But before that, we get a look at Jason's life at home, and we see that Jason has always had a thing for spilling blood. One afternoon, his babysitter finds a cat strung up to a tree and some others mutilated. But Pamela doesn't seem fazed by this. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. That girl that hitched a ride from Pamela at the beginning of the book, Pamela kills her. That's just what the Voorhees family does. The book ends where Pamela is revealed in the original movie, but we all know the massacre is only beginning. I think this book was a real missed opportunity. Pamela's backstory has always been shrouded in mystery, and this book kind of dropped the ball in giving us a deep dive into her life story. For one thing, it is way too short. Before you know it, Jason is born and drowning in Crystal Lake a few pages later. How about some stories where Pamela is having a hard time as a single parent, and is driven to dark places to survive and provide for her son? There's also that long-standing rumor of Pamela practicing witchcraft due to the Necronomicon being spotted in Jason Goes to Hell. Maybe play with some of that. I do like the idea of Pamela hearing Jason's voice in her head during her pregnancy, This is most likely Pamela growing an attachment to her son, since she finds no happiness in the terrible life she had with her husband. But I like the idea that it can be interpreted as Pamela and Jason having some sort of psycho killer spiritual bond. Up next is another 2-issue story by Jason Aaron and Adam Archer, How I Spent My Summer Vacation. Now this book is a lot of fun, and it's a simple premise. Of course, our story starts in Camp Crystal Lake, where a group of kids are hanging around a campfire, telling the story of the day young Jason Voorhees drowned in the lake. Among these kids is one that is deformed very similarly to Jason. His name is Davy Faulkner. And we all know that kids suck, so of course they make fun of Davy and throw him into the lake. They'll soon be sorry because Jason emerges from the woods and hacks them up. Yeah, these kids that can't be no older than 13 years old are not excluded from the thirst of Jason's machete. I don't want to say that I can't see Jason killing children. We all know his prime targets are horny teenagers, but actually seeing him kill these young kids, I'm not gonna lie, it kinda took me off guard. He straight up burns one alive. Ruthless. Just outside Crystal Lake, this meth head sheriff, Tannehill, tries to stop Jason, but ends up accidentally shooting 2 of the camp counselors as they're trying to escape. Jason spares Davy and kidnaps him. Davy spends the next couple of weeks as Jason's unofficial son. I live for these adorable moments in Friday the 13th comic books. Jason and Davy would spend the night sleeping in caves. Jason would kill people in the woods and steal their food to feed Davy. And just give him his best life. At first, Davy was reluctant to spend his days being held hostage by an undead hulking killer. But sooner than you'd think, he grows an attachment to Jason and willingly follows him around, describing it as the best summer vacation. Jason undoubtedly sees himself in Davy, connecting with him due to their similar deformity. Again, I really wasn't expecting a heartwarming moment from a Friday the 13th comic book. Elsewhere, Sheriff Tannehill has become paranoid and is hunting down Davy since he witnessed Tannehill shooting the camp counselors. This escalates to the point where he hijacks a military helicopter and eventually finds Jason and Davy. Tannehill manages to sneak up on Davy, but Jason comes to the rescue. They both fall off a cliff and Tannehill gets tangled up a bit. Davy gets taken away by a couple of soldiers with some newfound insight from his days spent with Jason. When you're different like Jason and him and want to survive, sometimes a bunch of assholes gotta die. I don't condone with that kind of behavior. Just saying. This 2-parter was a lot of fun. These are the kind of fun concepts I love to see in a Friday the 13th comic book. Friday the 13th movies are no doubt silly, but you can reach a level of silliness with these comic books and it works. At this point, I'm noticing that when a Friday the 13th comic book just tries to be a Friday the 13th movie, it just comes off as boring and unforgettable. And while this comic book is laughable, I don't see it as a far reach for Jason to connect with a kid that has a deformity like he does, and decides to lug him around and protect him. Once again, we have another 2-parter by Ron Mars and Mike Huddleston. Friday the 13th, Badland. This one is a bit of an oddball. It's about 2 stories that happen in different time periods but mirror one another. One is set during modern times where 3 hikers are going through a blizzard and come across an abandoned cabin where they take shelter. The other is set a couple of centuries back in the past where a group of hunters are also going through a blizzard and find shelter in a tent. Nothing out of the ordinary happens in the story set during present day. These young people hole up in a cabin, screw around, and Jason eventually shows up and does what he does. The one set in the past is a lot darker. The tent in which the hunters take shelter in is inhabited by a young Native American woman and her baby. 2 of the hunters, who are real assholes, have their way with her, and end up killing her and her baby when one of the hunters thought that she was reaching for a weapon, when it was really just a rattle. Shortly after, the presumed husband of the Native American woman shows up and goes on a rampage. He lunges at one of the hunters but gets shot in the face before he gets to him. Luckily, it doesn't kill him and he's able to retreat. The writers and artists make it a point to mirror the events as if there's a connection. The obvious is 2 vengeful slashers claiming lives. But are their spirits one and the same? At one point, 2 characters from the different time periods start muttering, bad place, over and over. So I guess this Native American man was one of the vessels that Crystal Lake inhabited, harkening back to the story of the shaman that was killed by the settlers? Was that shot to the face supposed to be fatal, but Crystal Lake granted him the opportunity for revenge? Or is he running on pure adrenaline? I guess it can be interpreted either way. I would have preferred it if the man was explicitly killed when he walked into the tent, and it was made apparent that he was resurrected through supernatural means by Crystal Lake, giving us a full-on primal version of Jason. Hell, maybe even donning some sort of sacred tribal mask, mirroring Jason's hockey mask. Let's wrap things up with Friday the 13th, Abuser and Abused, by Joshua Hale Kalkov and Andy B. This one is a standout for the art alone. It has this retro comic pop style with thick lines and vibrant colors. This made me realize how much I wish each Friday the 13th comic book had a distinct look, and strayed away from a generic look. Really, this looks awesome. This one follows Maggie, a young girl that seems to have the world against her. She has an abusive boyfriend who constantly beats her, her classmates make fun of her, the principal accuses her of just seeking attention ever since her mother died, her psychologist is no help, and neither is a priest. At home, her stepmother does nothing but berate her. That night, Maggie decides she's had enough. No one is gonna be there for her. She has to take care of herself. She kills her stepmother and calls up Steve, her boyfriend, late at night. She tricks him into driving to Camp Crystal Lake, where she brings his guard down and stabs him in the chest. But this is Jason's territory. You can't take the one thing he does away from him. You could have done it elsewhere. Maggie and Jason comedically fight over whose kill it is. After a short tussle, Maggie insists that her and Jason are the same, losing their mothers and having no one care for them, turning them into monsters. But she's spilling her guts upon deaf ears. The narrative setup for this one was sadly another underwhelming one. The best thing to come out of Abuser and Abused was definitely its art style. Again, I'd love to see more Friday the 13th comics with a unique look. And that's gonna do it for part 3 of my Friday the 13th comic books retrospective. We're coming up on the grand finale, where we'll be talking the crossover of the century. Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. Thanks for watching, and happy Friday the 13th.